"Who changed the locks on my house?" I shouted, jamming my cane in the doorframe. But Barbara Mitchell, my son's mother-in-law, just stared me down from inside my foyer, as if I was the trespasser. The hallway behind her was gutted of every family photo. The deed was gone. The rug was gone. And when I called my son, his voice didn't crack. It condescended. "You're 75, Mom. This is better for everyone." Then he hung up. That was the moment I realized the betrayal wasn't just legal. My own son drained my savings behind my back to fund the takeover. But what they didn't know? I've kept the original deed, hidden for decades. And I wasn't about to go quietly. My name is Evelyn Whitaker, and I'm 75 years old. After a month in rehabilitation for my fall, I spend my days carefully moving between the armchair and kitchen, savoring the familiar comforts of my paid-off home. My late husband Tom and I built this house together, marking our children's heights on the doorframe and polishing the banister with lemon oil every Sunday. My son Darren and his wife Jessica visit with her parents, the Caldwells, though their talk of unused equity and modernizing assets leaves my hands trembling. What they don't know is that I've always kept duplicate papers, the original deed tucked behind Tom's portrait, mortgage documents in my recipe box, everything filed twice. My father taught me that preparation prevents poor performance. But let me start from the beginning. The taxi pulled up to my curb around 4 in the afternoon. I handed the driver a 20 and waved off his offer to help with my small suitcase. "I may be slow," I told him with a smile, "but I'm steady. You know how it is when you're getting older. You learn to value independence, even in small doses." The late September air wrapped around me like a familiar shawl as I gripped my cane. That sweet smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with damp pavement brought back countless afternoons watching Tom tend to our lawn. He'd always insist on doing it himself, right up until that last summer. "A man's yard is his canvas," he'd say, wiping sweat from his brow. Something felt off, though. You ever get that feeling? Like when you walk into a room and can't quite put your finger on what's changed, but you know something has. There was a new doormat at the front steps, one of those generic welcome ones from the hardware store, not my hand-braided one with the little birds Tom's sister had made for us. And parked in our driveway was a charcoal gray SUV I'd never seen before. "Must be visitors," I muttered to myself, but my stomach knotted all the same. I made my way up the front walk, each step measured and careful. The doctor had warned me about taking it slow after the fall, and I wasn't about to prove him right about needing more time in rehab. At the bottom of the porch steps, I paused to catch my breath. 3 steps up. I'd climbed them thousands of times before, but now they looked like Mount Everest. 1 at a time then, holding tight to the railing Tom had installed when our joints started getting creaky. Finally, at the top, I pulled out my house key, the same brass one I'd used for 30 years. The metal slid into the lock, but instead of the familiar click, it ground to a halt halfway in. My hands started trembling as I tried again, slower this time, but the result was the same. Maybe the spare key? I always kept one on the same ring, just in case. But that one wouldn't turn either. The deadbolt stayed firmly in place, as unmovable as my confusion. My heart started pounding, that same urgent rhythm I'd felt whenever one of the kids had a high fever or Tom needed his medicine in the middle of the night. Years of being a caretaker teach you what real panic feels like, and this was it, creeping up my spine like ice water. I knocked on my own front door. Can you imagine? Standing there with my cane and my suitcase, having to knock on the door of the house I'd lived in for 3 decades. The door swung open, and I found myself face to face with a woman I'd never seen before. She looked to be in her 60s, wearing pale blue house slippers, standing in my entryway like she belonged there. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting I was the intruder. "There must be some mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my home. I'm Evelyn Whitaker." The woman's face hardened. "This is our home now," she said firmly, starting to push the door closed. I did something then I never thought I'd do. I wedged my cane in the doorframe, preventing it from shutting. "Who changed these locks?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "And how do you know the alarm code?" The stranger's eyes narrowed at my cane blocking her path. Through the gap in the doorway, I could see my hallway. The family photos were gone, replaced by abstract paintings I'd never choose in 1,000,000 years. My hand trembled on the cane wedged in the doorway. "I need to see some identification right now," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Through the gap, I could hardly recognize my own foyer. The hand-woven rug from Tom's mother, the one that had cushioned tiny footsteps and caught countless muddy boots, was gone, replaced by something beige and characterless from a department store. Our sturdy oak umbrella stand, the one Tom had restored himself, had been shoved into a corner like some unwanted relic, and the walls, my throat tightened. Where were the photographs? The gradual timeline of school pictures, wedding moments, and holiday gatherings that had marked our family's journey, all replaced by generic prints of sunsets and seashores. You know the kind you see in cheap hotel rooms? The ones meant to fill space without saying anything at all? The woman's lips thinned into a line as she reached for her purse on my entrance table. "I'm Barbara Mitchell," she said, flashing a driver's license. "My husband Richard and I completed a proper transfer of this property last week. Everything's completely legal and above board. Mitchell." The name hit me like a slap. These were my son's in-laws. With fingers that felt numb, I pulled out my flip phone, the same basic model I'd had for years, despite my son's repeated attempts to upgrade me. I put it on speaker and dialed his number, certain this was all some horrible misunderstanding he'd correct immediately. The ring echoed in the changed hallway. Once, twice. Then, "Mom?" His voice carried that same weary tone he'd used when explaining why they couldn't visit last Christmas. "David, I'm at the house," I said, watching Barbara Mitchell's face. "There seems to be some confusion. Your in-laws are here saying," he sighed loud enough to cut through the speaker, "Mom, I handled the paperwork. You don't need to manage property at this age. It's all taken care of." The words didn't make sense at first. They hung in the air like smoke, stinging my eyes and making it hard to breathe. Handled? What paperwork? My chest felt too tight. When did I give consent for any of this? The silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of him shifting his phone. When he spoke again, his voice had that special kind of condescension reserved for children and the elderly. "Mom, you're 75. The stairs alone are dangerous. You've already fallen once. Barbara and Richard will make sure the house is properly maintained. Your son is just looking out for your best interests," Barbara added, as if she had any right to speak about my interests at all. "Our lawyer has all the filings. Everything's completely legitimate." I stared at my phone, at my son's name on the tiny screen, remembering how proud I'd been the day he graduated law school, how he'd promised to always protect our family's interests. "David," I whispered. "Mom, don't make this difficult," he said. "The decision's been made." I ended the call. The foyer seemed to tilt slightly, and I gripped my cane tighter, fighting the wave of dizziness that threatened to overwhelm me. 30 years of mortgage payments, carefully maintained insurance, property taxes paid on time, all erased with a stroke of my own son's pen. Barbara's voice came from somewhere far away. "Our lawyer can explain everything tomorrow at 10 o'clock if you'd like." She paused, then added with false sweetness, "That is, if you can be reasonable about this." Reasonable. The word echoed in my head as I stared at the changed locks. The first line of defense my son had put in place against his own mother. The law office looked exactly like you'd expect. All polished wood and leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I arrived 10 minutes early, my cane tapping against marble floors that echoed every step like judgment. You ever notice how places of power always try to make you feel small? The conference room could have been a museum display. Modern. Corporate intimidation, circa now. Everything positioned just so, from the legal pad squared perfectly with the table edge to the diplomas arranged in descending date order on the wall. The attorney, Joshua Bennett, according to the brass nameplate, sat like he was posing for his own portrait. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, not bothering to stand. I appreciate your promptness. I settled into one of those two low chairs they keep for clients, the kind that force you to look up at them. The smell of furniture polish couldn't quite mask that new carpet chemical tang. Made me think of my own living room, how it still carried traces of Tom's pipe tobacco even years after he passed. Bennett slid a stack of papers across the table with 2 fingers, like he was dealing cards. These are copies of the deed transfer, properly notarized and filed with the county last week. As you can see, everything's in order for a clean title transfer. I didn't touch them. I never signed anything. Your son, David, acted as your power of attorney. His smile had all the warmth of a January sidewalk. Given your recent medical situations, the family felt it was time for some optimization of assets. Optimization? The word tasted bitter. That's my home of 40 years you're talking about. He leaned forward, elbows precise on the table. Mrs. Whitaker, the Mitchells are planning to list the property within 60 days. The market's excellent right now. We're looking at maximizing liquidity while rates are favorable. 60 days. 2 months to erase 4 decades. I could almost hear the calendar pages tearing away, each one taking another memory with it. Christmas mornings by the bay window, summer evenings on the porch swing, quiet Sunday afternoons when the light hit the eye. Stained glass just right. I'd like to speak with my son, I said, standing carefully. Bennett's expression didn't change as he checked his watch. He's expecting you at the coffee shop downstairs. David was already seated when I arrived, 2 cups on the table. The place had that generic chain store feel. Nothing like the cozy diner where I used to take him for hot chocolate after school. Remember when coffee shops had personality? Mom, he said, pushing 1 cup toward me. I got you chamomile. My hands shook slightly as I sat, but I kept my voice steady. 60 days? He stirred his own drink, not meeting my eyes. You're too old to manage a house that size, Mom. We've found some nice retirement condos with services, meals, housekeeping, everything you need. Everything except my dignity? I watched him flinch. I need time to review this, David, to understand what's happening. He shrugged, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a ring of keys. My keys, I realized. The brass one I'd used for the front door, the smaller one for the back garden gate, even the tarnished skeleton key that opened the antique secretary desk in the study. The buyers move fast, Mom. He set the keys on the table between us like a barrier. It's better this way, cleaner. I stood up, leaving the untouched tea steaming on the table. Outside, the noon sun felt too bright, too harsh. Every shadow seemed to point to a clock I couldn't see, counting down those 60 days. What would happen when a purchase agreement appeared before the week was out? When strangers started measuring my rooms for their furniture? My hands gripped the cane tighter as I thought about the bay window where Tom and I used to watch thunderstorms roll in. The kitchen door frame with pencil marks tracking David's, height year by year. The rose bushes Tom planted for our 20th anniversary that still bloomed every June. 60 days. Less probably once the paperwork started flying. That afternoon, I stood at my own front door again, knuckles white around my cane. You ever notice how the familiar can turn foreign in a heartbeat? The brass knocker I'd polished monthly for 40 years felt like it belonged to someone else. Martha Mitchell opened the door, her husband Harold hovering just behind her shoulder. The smell of cooking fish wafted out, my kitchen, their dinner. Mrs. Whitaker, Martha said, managing to make my name sound like an inconvenience. We weren't expecting you. I'd like to talk, if you have a moment. I kept my voice steady, the way Tom taught me during his business negotiations. Grace under pressure, he used to say. They exchanged a look I'd seen before, that sideways. Glance people give when they think age has softened your mind. Very well, Harold said, stepping back. 5 minutes. I didn't move past the threshold. Some battles are better fought on neutral ground, and that foyer wasn't mine anymore. Not with Martha's gaudy artwork replacing our family photos. I'm asking for a grace period, I said. Time to make arrangements, to sort through 40 years of memories. Martha's laugh could have frosted glass. Memories? That's exactly the problem, isn't it? You're just a relic clinging to dusty memories while this property sits here, underutilized. Underutilized? The word caught in my throat. This is my home. Was your home, Harold corrected. Really, you should be grateful. We're taking on quite a burden here. Taxes, maintenance, modernization. Our stewardship will finally bring this place into the present century. Stewardship. Like I was some medieval peasant, and they were the noble lords. I thought of Tom then, how his face would flush red whenever someone tried talking down to him. I see, I said, straightening my spine. Thank you for your time. Back in my temporary room at Margaret's house, I spent the evening with the phone book and a legal pad. You remember phone books? Real paper, not these glowing screens everyone carries now. I marked off law offices, noting retainers and hourly rates that made my stomach clench. 300 an hour, I muttered, writing another figure down. 5,000 retainer. The numbers marched down my page like tiny soldiers, each one taking a bite out of my fixed income. But I had some savings, not much but enough to maybe get started. I'd have to cut back on groceries, switch to generic brands, but surely I could manage one consultation. I pulled up my account on EA, Margaret's ancient computer, the kind that wheezes like it's running a marathon. The loading wheel spun and spun, each rotation marking another day lost on my mental countdown. 59 days left. 58 if you counted today. When the balance finally appeared, I thought the screen was glitching. I blinked hard, but the numbers stayed the same, sickly thin, like they'd been starved. That can't be right, I whispered to the empty room. I scrolled through the transactions, each one a fresh punch to the gut. ATM withdrawal during my second week in rehab. Online transfer 3 days later. Debit card purchase at an electronics store when I couldn't even walk without assistance. My hand found the edge of Margaret's desk, gripping hard as the cursor hovered over that first withdrawal. The timestamp showed 2:15 p.m., right when the nurses had me doing physical therapy. The legal consultations I'd planned for tomorrow suddenly felt as distant as the moon. You can't hire a lawyer with money that isn't there anymore. I stared at the transaction history until the numbers blurred. The room felt too warm, too small. Somewhere in the house, Margaret's grandfather clock chimed 9 times. Each ring, another reminder of time slipping away. How do you fight when they take your weapons before you even know you're in a war? The next morning, I stepped into the public library right as it opened. You know that library smell? Paper and dust and possibility. It usually calms me right down. Not today. Good morning, Mrs. Whitaker, Susan, the librarian, called out. I'd known her since she was shelving picture books after school. Computer area's free if you need it. I managed a smile. Thanks, dear. And could you help me with the printer later? She nodded, and I made my way to the farthest terminal, the one tucked behind the reference section where nobody could peek over my shoulder. My hands shook a bit as I logged into my account. Funny how something as simple as online banking can feel like defusing a bomb when you're looking for trouble. The statements loaded faster here than on Margaret's dinosaur of a computer. I started with last month, working backward. There they were, neat little rows of transactions, each one labeled Authorized Online Transfer. Most happened between 12:15 and 1:30 p.m., right when my son usually took his lunch break at the accounting firm. Clever, I muttered, reaching for my reading glasses. Each withdrawal stayed under $500, just shy of the threshold that would trigger one of those fraud alerts the bank was always bragging about. But add them up? That's how you bleed someone dry without making noise. I checked the dates against my phone's call history. Sure enough, every time money vanished, there'd be a voicemail from him. Hi, Mom. Just handling those errands we talked about. Or, got everything sorted with the bank, don't worry about it. We never talked about errands. I never asked him to handle anything. The printer hummed to life as I sent over page after page. Susan helped me collect them, but I caught her concerned glance at the highlighted columns. Everything all right? She asked. Just some bookkeeping, I said, keeping my voice light. The last thing I needed was well-meaning questions spreading through our small town's gossip vine. Back at my table, I pulled out the prepaid phone I'd bought yesterday. Another thing I never thought I'd need at 75. I photographed every statement, every highlighted transaction. The old saying about keeping your eggs in different baskets works for evidence, too. The library's clock ticked past 11 as I composed an email to the legal aid clinic Margaret had found. My fingers weren't as quick on the keyboard as they used to be, but I managed to explain things clearly enough. Unauthorized access, systematic withdrawals, the connection to the house transfer. I attached the last 3 months of statements and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Their auto-reply promised an intake appointment within 48 hours. Another 2 days gone from my 60-day countdown. Walking out into the harsh noon sun, every car horn and squealing brake seemed to echo that ticking clock in my head. 57 days left. Maybe less if those fast buyers my son mentioned were already circling. I found a quiet bench in the park across the street and pulled out my phone. My son's number sat there like a landmine waiting to go off. One question burned in my mind, sharp as a splinter. How did you get into my online banking without my permission? Such a simple question, but asking it would change everything. Make real what I'd been trying not to believe since yesterday. Once you accuse your own child of theft, there's no going back to pretending everything's fine. I remembered the day he graduated college, how proud he looked in his accounting regalia. "I'll always take care of you, Mom," he'd said at the celebration dinner. "You and Dad sacrificed so much for my education." Now here I sat, counting up all the ways he'd taken care of me, one unauthorized transfer at a time. My thumb hovered over his number as traffic hummed past. The bank statements felt heavy in my purse, each page weighted with betrayal. That evening, I sat at a kitchen table that didn't feel like mine anymore. Gone was the warm scent of cinnamon that used to drift from my potpourri bowls. Instead, some artificial pine freshener stung my nose, the kind you'd find in a realtor's staged house. My chest squeezed tight as a memory blindsided me. Tommy and I decorating our first Christmas tree in this very spot. Our son, barely tall enough to reach the middle branches, balanced on his father's shoulders to place the star. His little face glowed with such pride when Tommy lifted him higher. "Maybe," I whispered to the empty room, "maybe a retirement condo wouldn't be so bad." The words tasted like surrender. They have services after all. It might be. The phone's sharp ring cut through my spiral. Margaret's number lit up the display. "Evelyn?" Her voice carried 40 years of friendship. "You don't sound right." "I'm fine, just tired." But my voice wobbled, betraying me. "Stay put. I'm coming over." 20 minutes later, Margaret swept through the front door of her house where I was staying, armed with 2 thermoses and a spiral notebook. She didn't waste time on pleasantries, just poured us both soup, her signature vegetable beef, and clicked her pen. "Now then," she said, ruling neat lines across the page. "Let's make a proper list. First, legal aid intake tomorrow morning at 9. Second, bank fraud department. They have to investigate unauthorized, access. Third, deed verification through county records." I stirred my soup, the warmth seeping into my cold hands. "Margaret, I don't know if I can—" "Stop right there." She tapped her pen against the notebook. "I didn't let you give up when Tommy passed, and I'm not letting you give up now. This is just another mountain to climb, one step at a time." The next morning found me in the legal aid office, a cramped space that smelled of coffee and desperation. The intake coordinator, a young woman with kind eyes and tired shoulders, reviewed my paperwork. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, folding her hands, "I wish I had better news. Our wait list for full representation is about 8 weeks out." My heart sank. "The house could be sold by then." "I understand." She slid a packet across her desk. "The best thing you can do right now is collect primary evidence. Bank records, deed history, any documentation showing your ownership. Here are some vouchers for photocopies at the courthouse." I gathered the papers with numb fingers. Outside, storm clouds gathered, heavy and dark like my mood. Margaret waited in her car, reading glasses perched on her nose as she studied a magazine. She took one look at my face and squeezed my hand. "Don't you dare give up yet, Evelyn. There's one more place we need to check before we let despair take. Route." "Where?" I asked, watching the first drops hit the windshield. "You'll see." She started the engine. "Sometimes the best evidence isn't in official offices at all." The rain began to fall in earnest as we pulled away from the curb, each drop another tick of that 60-day clock in my head. "Sit," Margaret ordered, steering me to her dining room table. "And don't move." I watched her disappear into her kitchen, my fingers tracing the familiar scratches in her oak table. How many Sunday dinners had we shared here, trading stories and recipes while our husbands talked sports? Margaret returned clutching a thick recipe book, its spine cracked and spotted with age. Gold letters spelled out cherry pie in faded script. She set it down with deliberate care, like she was handling fine china. "You know," she said, pulling out the chair next to me, "all these years I've listened to you talk about your filing system, how you keep the important stuff tucked away in places nobody'd think to look." She tapped the cookbook's cover. "Remember what you gave me to hold on to, back when Tommy first got sick?" I frowned, trying to pierce the fog of those difficult days. I don't." She opened the book, and there, nestled between pages sticky with cherry stains, was a manila envelope. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but I recognized my own neat handwriting across the front. House, original. My hands trembled as I reached for it. "Oh, my word," I whispered. I'd completely forgotten. "You told me to keep it safe," Margaret said softly. "Said sometimes families get funny about property when illness comes around." She squeezed my shoulder. "Guess you were right about that part." The envelope's flap was still sealed with its original glue. I eased it open, holding my breath as I slid out the contents. There it was, the original deed to my home, my name clear as day beside Tommy's. The notary's seal stood out crisp and official, the dates forming an unbroken chain of ownership that had nothing to do with my son's in-laws. "Let me see that," Margaret said, adjusting her reading glasses. She pointed to a clause near the bottom. "Look here, it specifically excludes transfer without both parties' written consent. And since Tommy's gone," she glanced up at me, "that means you're the only one who could have signed it over," "which I didn't," I said, my voice stronger now. I pulled out my phone and carefully photographed each page, making sure the timestamps were clear. "Hand me that plastic sleeve from your bill folder." While Margaret fetched it, I dug out the attorney's letter with its 60-day warning. 38 days left. The thought of my home being listed online by next week, strangers clicking through virtual tours of my memories. "We need to move fast," I said, sliding the deed into its protective cover. "The bank opens at 9. I want the manager to verify these signatures first thing. Then we'll need the courthouse clerk to authenticate the notary seal and—" Margaret was already writing. "I'll drive. We'll hit the notary on Oak Street right after the bank. My cousin's friend works in the clerk's office. I'll call her tonight, see if she can squeeze us in before lunch." I set the alarm on my phone for dawn, determined to be ready the moment Margaret's car pulled up. If we could get an emergency hearing, if we could show the judge our evidence before that 60-day clock ran out. "You know what this means?" Margaret asked, laying down her pen. I nodded, touching the sleeve that held my deed. The weight of hopelessness that had pressed against my chest these past days began to lift. "It means we have a chance. More than a chance," she said firmly. "It means you've got proof. Real, solid proof that they can't talk their way around." She reached for her phone. "Now, let me call Sarah at the courthouse while you make us both some tea. We've got a busy morning ahead. You know those mornings when every minute feels like it's made of molasses? That was us, Margaret and me, huddled outside the courthouse at 7:30 sharp. The concrete steps were still damp from the night's rain, and my cane kept slipping a bit, but I wasn't about to sit on those cold benches. "Here," Margaret said, pulling 2 paper cups from a cardboard tray. "Extra sugar in yours. We need you sharp today." I wrapped my fingers around the warmth, watching other early birds drift in. Lawyers with briefcases, clerks, with coffee, people clutching papers like lifelines, just like us. The security guard, bless him, took one look at my cane and waved us through the metal detector first when the doors opened. We found the clerk's office and pulled number 23 from the red dispenser. The wait gave me time to sort through our stack one more time, deed on top, bank statements arranged by date, my clinic paperwork showing exactly when I'd been laid up. Mrs. Whitaker? The clerk had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I set our papers on the counter, and she leafed through them with the efficiency of someone who'd seen every legal drama possible. With these documents, she said, tapping the deed, you'll want to file for an emergency quiet title hearing. And given what you've told me about the 60-day deadline, she pulled out a blue form. We should add an injunction request to freeze any potential sale. My hands were steady as I filled out the forms. Years of balancing checkbooks and tracking household expenses had taught me the value of careful paperwork. Margaret stood beside me, reading over my shoulder and pointing out spots I'd missed. The clerk assembled everything into a neat packet, adding yellow sticky tabs where I needed to sign. Now, she said, lowering her voice, Judge Harrison has a packed docket, but given the time-sensitive nature, she made a quick phone call, nodding as she listened. Tomorrow afternoon at 2. It's the best we can do. Tomorrow? I felt my throat tighten. That soon? Time's not exactly our friend here, Margaret reminded me gently. We spent that evening at my kitchen table. Well, what used to be my kitchen table, now pushed against an unfamiliar wall. Margaret had brought over her old tape recorder, and we practiced questions and answers until my voice was hoarse. Remember, she said, playing back a section, keep your answers clear and direct. No meandering down memory lane, no matter how much it hurts. I nodded, adjusting another sticky tab on our exhibit folder. Each document was labeled and organized chronologically, just like I'd done with our family photo albums all those years. You ever notice how night sounds change when you're worried? That refrigerator hum, I'd barely noticed for decades, suddenly became this persistent drone, keeping time with every anxious thought. I dozed off sometime after midnight, but kept starting awake, reaching for my phone to check the time. Morning finally pushed through the blinds around 6. I stood in front of my closet, at least they'd left my clothes alone, and pulled out the navy suit I'd worn to Tommy's memorial. The fabric still held its crisp lines, and the pearl buttons caught the early light. Margaret picked me up at 1:30. The courthouse hallway smelled exactly like you'd expect, that mix of paper and lemon cleaner that seems standard issue in every government building. We found 2 seats on the hard wooden bench outside courtroom C. Deep breaths, Margaret whispered, squeezing my hand. At precisely 2 o'clock, the bailiff pushed open those heavy double doors. A young man in an expensive suit, had to be their lawyer, strode past us with a confident nod. Show off. The court clerk appeared at her desk, shuffling papers. All rise, the bailiff called out. The Court of Common Pleas is now in session, the Honorable Judge Harrison presiding. The judge stepped onto the bench, his black robe settling around him like a crow's wings. He adjusted his reading glasses and picked up our file. Case number 2023 CV 4891, the clerk announced. In the matter of Whitaker versus Whitaker, et al. Emergency petition for quiet title and preliminary injunction. Their lawyer stood up, straightening his tie with manicured fingers. Your Honor, this is a straightforward family matter. His voice had that practiced smoothness you hear in TV commercials. Mrs. Whitaker's son recognized signs of elder neglect and took necessary steps to ensure proper care of both the property and his mother. I felt my spine stiffen. Neglect? My hands tightened on the folder in my lap, but something strange happened. Instead of that familiar flutter of anxiety, a steady warmth spread through my chest. You know that feeling when someone's lying about you, and you're holding the proof that'll shut them right up? That's what it was. Mrs. Whitaker, the judge said, please approach the witness stand. Margaret squeezed my hand as I stood. The bailiff helped me navigate the little gate in the railing. These old courthouses weren't built with canes in mind, let me tell you. After I was sworn in, my son's lawyer started in with questions about my fall and the rehabilitation clinic. I kept my answers clear and direct, just like Margaret and I had practiced. Yes, I spent 4 weeks at Riverside Rehabilitation Center following a minor fall. No, I did not authorize any property transfers during that time. Yes, I remained mentally alert and oriented throughout my stay. Then it was my turn. I pulled out the deed from its protective sleeve, handling it with the same care I used to show my grandmother's china. Your Honor, this is the original deed to 1247 Maple Street, I said, my voice steady as a summer morning. My late husband Thomas and I received it when we purchased the property in 1973. I've maintained continuous ownership since his passing in 2019. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses. Please describe how you've maintained this document. I've always kept important papers in unexpected places, I explained. It's a habit I developed early in our marriage. Tax records behind family photos, insurance policies and recipe books. This deed was stored in an envelope marked Cherry Pie Recipe at my friend Margaret Wilson's home. Objection! Their lawyer shot to his feet. The chain of custody. Overruled, the judge cut in, studying the notary seal through his glasses. The document appears authentic, and Mrs. Whitaker's explanation is both reasonable and specific. Continue. The bailiff marked it as Exhibit A, and I reached for the second folder, the bank statements I'd printed at the library. Even now, those transaction lines made my stomach clench, but I kept my voice level as I held up the papers. These records show a pattern of withdrawals made during my rehabilitation stay, I began. Each transfer was initiated online, using access I never authorized. The judge's pen hovered above his legal pad. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom as I prepared to walk through those transactions one by one. Their lawyer shifted in his seat, his confidence wavering just a fraction. But I wasn't focused on him anymore. I was thinking about all those careful years of tracking every penny, teaching my son the value of honest bookkeeping. Now those same skills would reveal exactly what he'd done. I opened the bank statements, laying them next to the clinic admission records on the witness stand. Your Honor, if you'll look at the first withdrawal on April 12th, that was 3 days after I entered rehabilitation. $2,000 transferred at 1:15 p.m. to an account I've never seen before. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the old radiator clicking in the corner. I traced my finger down the page, each entry making my heart sink a little deeper. April 15th, $1,200 at 1:22 p.m. April 19th, $1,800 at 1:17 p.m. April 23rd, $2,500 at 1:20 p.m. I paused, letting the pattern sink in. Every transfer occurred during my son's lunch hour, when he knew I'd be in physical therapy. The judge studied the documents, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. And these phone logs? These show calls from my son, Your Honor, usually right after the transfers. He'd leave messages about handling my errands or taking care of paperwork. I saved them all. My voice stayed steady, though my fingers trembled slightly as I handed over the printed log. Mrs. Whitaker, the judge leaned forward. Did you provide your son with online banking access or passwords? No, Your Honor. I've never shared those details with anyone. When I discovered the withdrawals, I immediately changed all passwords and contacted the bank's fraud department. Their lawyer stood up, his confidence noticeably dimmed. Your Honor, this is clearly a misunderstanding between mother and son. Family members often share. Counselor, the judge cut him off. These timestamps show a deliberate pattern during Mrs. Whitaker's documented rehabilitation sessions. That's not a misunderstanding. That's calculation. The lawyer tugged at his collar. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of my son's face turning pale. The court will take a 15-minute recess, the judge announced, gathering his papers. I've seen enough to make my findings. During the break, Margaret squeezed my hand. We didn't speak. What was there to say? 48 years of memories in that house. And it had come to this: bank statements and court orders. When the judge returned, his face had that stern set I'd seen on my fourth-grade teacher right before she caught someone cheating. Having reviewed the evidence, he began, this court finds clear and convincing proof of elder financial exploitation under State Statute 475.3. The purported deed transfer is hereby declared void ab initio. The attempted sale is permanently enjoined. He paused, looking directly at my son's lawyer. Furthermore, this court orders full restitution of all withdrawn funds, subject to a detailed accounting to be completed within 30 days. The gavel cracked like summer thunder. I closed my eyes for just a moment, feeling the weight of weeks lift from my shoulders. But I kept my hands folded tight. Paper victories need real-world teeth to bite. I watched my son gather his things, his shoulders hunched as whispers followed him toward the door. His in-laws huddled with their lawyer, faces pinched with something between anger and fear. The court clerk was already stamping copies of the order, official notice that would soon reach employers, banks, and every gossip in town. You can't build a life on betrayal and expect the foundation to hold. That's what my Thomas always said, and oh, how right he was. I stepped out of the courthouse into warm afternoon light that felt different somehow. Cleaner, maybe, or just less heavy on my shoulders. Margaret offered to drive me to her place, but I needed those few blocks to walk and think. You know how sometimes your feet just need to move while your mind catches up? I'll call you when I get there, I promised, patting her arm. The sidewalk stretched ahead, maple trees casting gentle shadows that reminded me of summers when Thomas and I would stroll after dinner, planning our garden and dreaming about retirement. I hadn't gone 2 blocks when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't familiar, but something made me answer anyway. Mrs. Whitaker? The voice was professional, careful. This is David Chen from Midwest Financial. I worked with your son in account services. My hand tightened on the phone. Yes? I thought you should know. HR called an emergency ethics review during lunch break. They had copies of the court documents by 11. He paused, and I could hear him choosing his words. The company has strict policies about financial misconduct. They're particularly sensitive since we handle client accounts. I found a bench near the old post office and sat down. Go on. They terminated his position about 20 minutes ago. Ethical violations, they're calling it. He's been walked out. David's voice softened. I know it's not my place, but what he did to you, well, let's just say nobody here's surprised about the outcome. After thanking him, I sat there watching sparrows hop between crumbs someone had scattered. You raise a child, teach them right from wrong, and still somehow end up here, on a bench in the afternoon sun, hearing how their choices finally caught up with them. My phone buzzed again with a text from, Margaret, check your email. The neighborhood listserv is lighting up. I pulled up my inbox, and there it was. Screenshots of the court order being passed around like holiday cards. Someone had even highlighted the judge's findings about exploitation. Below that, a link to our local columnist's blog. Elder Financial Abuse, When Greed Corrupts Family. The post was short but pointed, talking about those who prey on vulnerable seniors and betrayal masquerading as concern. A second message from Margaret popped up. The in-laws canceled their open house. Their realtor pulled the listing. I scrolled through comments appearing under the blog post. Names I recognized from church, from garden club, from decades of community life. They weren't kind. One mentioned how the in-laws had chaired the hospital charity gala last spring. Ironic, someone replied, considering how they treat actual vulnerable people. By the time I reached Margaret's house, the sun was setting. She had tea waiting, chamomile with honey, just like always. We sat at her kitchen table, the injunction papers spread out between cookie crumbs and tea stains. You won, Evelyn, she said softly. The house is yours. They can't touch it. I traced my finger over the judge's signature. I know, but victory doesn't feel quite like I thought it would. Margaret reached across and squeezed my hand. Of course it doesn't, dear. It's not supposed to. I'd brought a small cardboard box from my temporary room upstairs. Just some photos, Thomas's reading glasses, the cross-stitch sampler our daughter made in 4th grade. Tomorrow I'd walk back to my house with these pieces of my life. Tomorrow I'd put my key in a lock that was mine again. I picked up Thomas's glasses, remembering how he'd always leave them on top of his crossword puzzles. "What do you think it'll feel like?" I asked Margaret. "Walking back in?" She poured more tea, giving me time to find the rest of my question. "Will it feel like winning?" I finally managed. "Or will it just feel like aftermath?" The glasses caught the last bit of evening light, casting tiny shadows on the tablecloth. Outside, a car door slammed, and someone called goodnight to a neighbor. Normal sounds, from a normal street, while I sat wondering how tomorrow's homecoming would settle in my chest. The mid-morning sun caught me halfway up the front walk, warming my shoulders like an old friend's embrace. I paused, key in hand, and breathed in the familiar scent of Mrs. Peterson's lilacs next door. You know that moment when everything feels both completely normal and utterly different? That's where I stood, right on the edge of it. My new key slid home with a smooth click. None of that grinding resistance from weeks ago. Inside, sunlight poured through the foyer windows, scattering across my grandmother's Persian rug like it had 10,000 mornings before. Dust motes danced in the light beams, and I thought how they looked like tiny bits of celebration confetti, nature's own way of marking the moment without spending a dime. I set the court order on the foyer table, its official seal facing up. Right beside it, I placed the original deed, that blessed piece of paper that had turned the tide. Its creases had softened from riding in my pocket through the courthouse battle, and it felt warm from my palm, like it had absorbed some of my determination along the way. Remember how I told you about my habit of touching things to make sure they're real? Well, I did my rounds then, trailing my fingers along the banister where Thomas and I had hung Christmas garlands every December. The mantel still held smooth spots from where our family photos had stood guard. Each window latch clicked with the same familiar catch, some a bit sticky from age, others smooth as butter. Margaret called while I was in the dining room. "Have you seen this morning's paper?" she asked, that hint of satisfaction clear in her voice. "Not yet," I admitted, running my hand along the chair rail. "Front page of the business section. Senior executive terminated for ethics violations. They didn't name names, but everyone knows. And Helen just called. Apparently, the country club's annual charity gala committee had a sudden reorganization. Your former in-laws' names disappeared from the letterhead." I sank into Thomas's old armchair by the window. "The in-laws? Oh, it gets better," Margaret continued. "Remember that hospital board position Janet was so proud of? She stepped down to spend more time with family. That's code for asked to resign, if I ever heard it. Their social calendar's emptier than the church on Super Bowl Sunday. I watched a pair of cardinals hop across the back fence, the same pair that had nested in our maple tree every spring. Sounds like their perfect world's showing some cracks." "Cracks? Evelyn, it's a sinkhole. Charlotte told me they haven't been seen at Sunday brunch in weeks. Even their tennis foursome found new partners." After we hung up, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. The fireproof box waited on the dresser. A new one, since they'd taken the old one during their occupation. I lifted Thomas's watch from its velvet pouch, the face still bearing that tiny scratch from when he'd caught it on his workbench back in '82. Laying it in the box, I placed the deed beside it. 2 anchors of our family's truth, side by side. Standing there, I could almost hear Thomas's voice. "Well done, old girl. Well done indeed." I walked back downstairs, each step feeling more solid than the last. The front door still stood open, letting in a blade of sunlight so bright it nearly hurt my eyes. But I didn't squint or look away. Instead, I stood right in that stream of light and spoke the words that had been building in my chest since the judge's gavel fell. Greed always digs its own grave. The house settled around me with a familiar creak, as if agreeing with every syllable. You see, some people think revenge is best served cold. But I've learned it's best served by justice, the slow, steady kind that lets truth rise like cream to the top. The kind that doesn't need schemes or plots, just patience and a firm grip on what's right. Standing there in my own foyer, watching sunlight paint the walls gold, I knew we'd come full circle. The house Thomas and I built with love had weathered its storm. And those who'd tried to take it? Well, they'd learned the hard way that some things can't be bought, sold, or stolen. They can only be earned.